UCP members will soon debate 35 party resolutions at their upcoming convention November 1st and 2nd. Now, some of the policy ideas include banning transgender people from women's washrooms and the use of non-binary gender identifiers on government documents. Some of the more unusual policy ideas, however, did not make the cut for what will be debated. To chat about this in more detail is our legislative reporter and the Alberta correspondent for the National Post, Tyler Dawson, who joins us once again from Edmonton. Tyler, what are some of the more unusual policy ideas that won't be discussed?
Well, so the way the whole system works is various constituency associations make policy proposals, and then a document went out to the party membership back in early September, and members could sort of rank or vote on what they felt were the most important policy proposals, and those are the ones that we now see in this 35 strong list. So some of those original ones are, were just sort of unusual. One of them that really caught my eye, for example, was the idea of bringing in strong mayor legislation in Alberta. Now, this has already happened in Ontario, and it basically means that a mayor is a little bit more than just one vote on council. They have some budget making responsibilities, they have some veto powers. And there was the proposal that the UCP should consider that as government policy. That did not make the cut. There were some suggestions that there should be funding restrictions on sort of late-term abortions. That didn't make the cut either. So really what you have here is this sort of final list, and a good chunk of it is very much bread and butter conservative politics, opposition to the carbon tax. I think nobody's surprised that the UCP is going to be debating their opposition to the carbon tax, although I can't imagine there's going to be people on the yes and the no side of that one. And then there's also a whole bunch of sort of social and cultural issues, restrictions around, as you mentioned, where transgender people can use change rooms or washrooms, for example. The other one you mentioned was to only have two genders on official government documents. This would actually reverse a policy change made by Rachel Notley's NDP in 2018. So really what you have here is some bread and butter conservative issues and a bunch of sort of social cultural issues that are certainly very exciting for the UCP base. In the broader context, though, I think there's a lot of concern in Alberta right now about cost of living, the state of healthcare. So you have to wonder if the policy proposals that are going to be debated, if these are really the things that Albertans are, particularly concerned about at the moment. So that's something that I think is going to be quite interesting going forward.
Now, during this convention, Daniel Smith will also be facing a leadership review. Now, normally a leader doesn't face a review after winning an election, but this is kind of an unusual quirk the party's put in place.
Yeah, so the all this stuff's sort of governed by party bylaws, and one of those rules is that every third convention, or once every 3 years, there needs to be a leadership review, sort of regardless of anything else that's been going on. And Smith didn't have one for the last couple of years. Obviously, the first year she'd just become party leader. Last year she'd just won an election. So this year is sort of by the rules that the party has. This has got to be the year that they do it. But it is unusual. You don't generally win a minority government and then have your party members going, well, I don't really know about this Danielle Smith character. She only led us to a majority government. It's very strange, and it really some of the criticism of it from within the party is that this is really an unstable way to do things. The leader needs to worry about this leadership review when there's other things that maybe should be occupying her time. There's the argument that this is sort of forcing a focus on some of these less mainstream ideas because there's people in the party who are particularly animated and concerned about these things. So the basic idea is that, well, does this really derail the party's sort of overall objectives? And there's been some talk about saying, well, maybe we should stop this. Now, that would require, changes to the bylaws and all that, but it is an unusual situation. And I don't think anyone expects Danielle Smith to lose during that vote, but certainly puts her in a bit of an odd spot coming into this convention.
Tyler, the Alberta government a while ago launched the Tell the Feds campaign, warning that no one wants to freeze in the dark because of the Trudeau government's clean electricity regulations. Well, there's another one that's come forward. They're doing a lot of advertising on this one, attacking the feds once again, but this one is called Scrap the Cap. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, so this is an advertising campaign that's going to be running in, I think, 5 provinces, about a $7 million campaign. And it's going to be in opposition to the forthcoming cap, the emissions cap on the oil and gas sector. So these ads will run in print, social media, online, that all that fun stuff across the country. Now, it's going to be interesting how much attention this gets, I think, because one of the things that worked well about the Tell the Feds campaign, about the clean electricity regulations, is that everyone kind of understands what's going to happen if there's not enough power to heat your house, or keep the lights on during the middle of winter. You have to wonder if folks in Quebec or Ontario or New Brunswick are going to be quite so concerned about an emissions cap that might force the oil and gas sector to scale back its operations a little bit. But this campaign is at any rate going to talk about, the risk to the economy, the potential for job losses that the emissions cap might bring in. Obviously, there's all sorts of policy areas in which the Alberta government disagrees with the federal government, and this advertising campaign is just another way to keep the pressure on to make sure that that opposition is sort of registered in the public.
Tyler, Alberta's former Justice Minister, Casey Madu, is being sanctioned by the Law Society of Alberta for phoning the Edmonton police chief after being pulled over by an Edmonton police officer. You and I talked about that in the past.
We have, yeah, a few times, I think. This was way back when, kind of now. And he was justice minister under Jason Kenney at the time. And Kenney had pulled him out of the justice portfolio because of this. There was, I believe, an ethics commissioner investigation that sort of found that Madu had impugned the administration of justice, basically, by as justice minister, making this phone call to the Edmonton police chief. Madu defended himself, said he was concerned about racial profiling and things like that. But since he lost his seat in the last election, Madu has gone back to sort of private practice as a lawyer. And obviously, the Law Society has some sort of general sort of governance over the conduct of lawyers and things like that, and can introduce sanctions and things like that. So there's going to be sanctions against him. We don't know what they're going to be yet, but it just goes to show that, this saga is not quite over for the former Minister of Justice, even if he's not actually in politics anymore.
Now, beginning next month, our province will be launching a new health agency called Primary Care Alberta. Officials say it'll be focused on getting more doctors into the province, which we need, and promoting more connectivity between various primary care professions. And unsurprisingly, Tyler, the NDP slammed the idea.
Yeah, Head Nenshi basically saying this is, shuffling the deck chairs on a sinking ship. Obviously, healthcare is one of those things that the NDP really likes talking about it because it's a good issue for them, and I think it's also very much a large concern for Albertans right now. And so this is part of that much larger overhaul of Alberta healthcare that the UCP has proposed to sort of have four pillars looking at, or managing, I should say, different aspects of the healthcare system. The first one already launched. That's Recovery Alberta, which is sort of the mental health and addiction side of the operation. And as the name suggests, Primary Care Alberta, this is much more on the primary care front. So I think there's some big questions that remain here, whether or not creating these four pillars is going to improve efficiency and communication across these pillars, or whether or not, having them hyper focused on a specific thing, which is what the government is saying, is going to improve healthcare outcomes. Maybe a bit early to tell. Although there were some numbers out just the other day that I think Alberta got about 500 new doctors in the last quarter or so. But this is top of mind, I think, for a lot of Albertans, and the UCP is trying to do something on it. It's hard to say, I think, whether or not it's going to work. I mean, there's been so many reorganizations of healthcare over the years. If we think back to the super boards and all that stuff from, oh gosh, that must have been the Prentice years, maybe the Stelmach years, long time ago. Anyway, so I think time will tell primarily whether or not this is improving the healthcare outcomes in the province.
Tyler, Premier Daniel Smith will be looking for a new chief of staff. Marshall Smith will be stepping down. Smith is notable for being the driving force behind the UCP's addiction strategy. Do we know why he's leaving?
Well, he's been in politics for a really long time, and is just sort of heading towards retirement. Seems to be the outcome. There doesn't seem to have been any, particular scandal or anything to push him out the door. But it is going to be interesting because Marshall Smith, who I should say is not related to Danielle Smith, has, as you say, been really the driving force behind one of these big policy areas, and that's the addictions and recovery sort of aspect of the drug crisis. And Marshall has been pushing the idea that there should be recovery, that it should be a recovery-oriented system, and he's been working really hard on that really since 2019 when the UCP first formed government. So it's going to be interesting to see how that philosophy, I guess, is sustained, or if he feels maybe that there are people in place now who will carry on that mission, I guess. But obviously, for the premier, she needs to find a new chief of staff, and doubtless that means there's going to be some changes in the premier's office, and journalists are going to have to get to know a new person to contact and chat with here and there off the record and things. So it'll be interesting to see what changes, if anything. But it isn't. I mean, staffing change in the premier's office is not really all that regularly, a news story. But in this case, Marshall, I think, is such a a distinctive presence in the government that this really caught people's attention.
The Alberta government is threatening to launch another lawsuit against Bill C-69, otherwise known as the No More Pipelines Bill. Tyler, didn't our province already win a legal challenge at the Supreme Court against that legislation?
Yes, indeed. Back in 2023, the Supreme Court sided with Alberta on parts of Bill C-69, not the whole thing. The whole thing was not found unconstitutional, but big chunks of it were. And so usually what happens when legislation is found unconstitutional, it goes back to the parliament or the legislature and they sort of craft new legislation to sort of fit around the constitutional guidelines, I guess, that the courts have given. So that's what's happened here. And Alberta is obviously not happy with the changes that the Liberals in Ottawa have made to that legislation. So there is a threat of another lawsuit. I think Danielle Smith gave them November 1st or 2nd, sort of as a deadline to do that before a lawsuit is launched. Obviously, that's not going to happen. Obviously, the Liberals are not going to completely rewrite this legislation just because Premier Smith is upset about it. So there could be another, perhaps almost certainly will be another legal challenge here. And then, of course, time will tell whether or not this challenge is as successful as the one before, which, Alberta has a mixed record on this, right? We lost on the carbon tax, won on Bill C-69. So if the province takes another crack at it, who knows what that outcome could be.
Maybe Trudeau needs to consider another environment minister instead of Stephen
Maybe.
Guilbeault there. That relationship is not the strongest between he and Premier Danielle Smith.
No, it's not. It's been a fairly fractious one, but Smith has said that she works relatively well with Jonathan Wilkinson, who I think is the Energy and Natural Resources Minister. So there are some okay relationships between the Alberta government and the federal government, but when it comes to Guilbeault and Alberta politicians, not a lot of warm feelings between the two.
They're not sending each other Christmas cards, is what you're saying.
No, I can't imagine they are.
No. Tyler, no by-election date yet for Lethbridge West here in our riding. It needs to come by the end of the year. Do you anticipate that it will be announced when the legislature resumes in a couple of weeks' time?
Oh, that's my guess. I mean, you really don't want to leave this till like December. No one wants to be voting in a by-election or campaigning in a by-election in the middle of winter. So you have to think it's coming soon. Have it soon, relatively short sort of campaigning period, and then go to the polls. I would be shocked if it didn't come sort of by the end of the month or early next month. But who knows? Maybe there's some 4D chess happening here and delaying this. But I do think it obviously has to happen by January 1st, and I think it would be unusual to have it sort of towards Christmas when the legislature ends up on break and stuff like that. So I think it will happen sooner rather than later, and then that'll obviously be the first big test for Nenshi as leader of the NDP. It'll obviously be a bit of a test for the sort of stability and allure, I guess, of Danielle Smith's UCP and a riding that has been an NDP riding for almost a decade. So there's I think it's high stakes in many ways, and it'll be really interesting to watch. But the question is, when are we going to get to watch it?
And the two candidates, too, both very strong. You've got the NDP's Rob Miyashiro, former city councillor and current city councillor for the UCP, John Middleton Hope, who is also the former police chief here in Lethbridge. So they both have very, very deep roots. So yeah, it'll definitely be interesting with this by-election. He's our legislative reporter and the Alberta correspondent with the National Post, Tyler Dawson. Thanks so much for joining us once again from Edmonton.
Thanks for having me, Hal.